Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, 10 lines from the top at the 2 dots. Tan Rabbanon, Ketzad Ma'av Mesar. How do we extend the cities? So we learned before that if there's an unusual shape in the city, we don't measure from the protrusions. We square it off. We extend the city before we measure the Alpine Mama for the Tchum Shabbos. So now we're going to give different examples. So Zok the Braisa Ketzad Ma'av Mesarim. Then we say Arucha Kamoishi. If the town is long, then we leave it alone. Meaning, if it's a rectangle, if it's not an unusual shape, then you don't square it off. You don't extend the city. And the more will explain what the chiddush over here. We'll see shortly. Agula oisem lazavias. But if it's round, if the city is in a circular shape, houses are all in a round over here. We don't measure from each side 2,000 houses. We first square it off. So we first draw lines and square it off, and then we measure from the square. So therefore, in that way, you benefit from the corners. You square it off, it becomes a square, and therefore you measure from not here, but you measure from the squared off portion. So you measure now from this distance, you'll measure from the line that comes across. And therefore you'll gain these corners over here, and on both sides, you'll gain the corners, and you measure therefore not from here, but you'll measure from the line that we draw over here. You measure from this line, and as opposed to measuring the 2,000 amas here, in this distance from here, you'll measure it from this line that you draw over here, and on the other side as well, and at the bottom as well. So you square it off first. So agula oisem lozaviyas murubas, but if it's square, we don't make corners for it. So the Gemara is going to ask the obvious question: if it's square, it's already square. How could you make corners for it? So we'll see in the Gemara shortly. Haisa rechava mitzad echad ksar mitzad acher. If it was wider on one side and narrower on the other side, so if on one side it was wider, and the other side it was narrower, and so here it was wider, then it narrowed. The city narrowed. So on this end over here, it doesn't come out as wide. So haisa rechava mitzad echad ksar mitzad acher. Then what you do is we treat it like it's equal. So you have to then square it off and draw the line across. So you have to look at it like it's equal and then draw the line. So you don't measure from here. You measure from a straight line. You look at it like this is extended and it has the same width as the wider portion. So even though there are no houses over here, however, we draw the line and we extend it out. So it's ma'avrim esair. We're extending it out and coming to the line of the wider side. If one of the houses protruded like a tower, or two houses like two towers, you look at it like there's a string that's stretched between them, and you measure the Alpine Mama from the houses that extend out. So therefore, if you have a house that extends out, so this house over here extends somewhat further. You draw the line from this protrusion. If you have it on two sides, then you draw the line here. So you don't measure from here, you measure from here. So then we'll ask, what's the chiddush if one or two? What's the chiddush if you measure from one? Why does it have to tell me two? So we'll see in the Gemara. Isa kimun keshes. Now, if it was made like a bow, so if the city was made in that shape, the houses were built all along over here like in a bow. So it's a circular. Now this area here is open. So the same principle. What we say is you don't measure the 2,000 amas from here. You don't measure it from here. You draw the line across the two ends of the bow. You look at it like it's filled in, and you draw the 2,000 amas from the line that's across them. So therefore, you're measuring, you look at this as all filled in. You measure 2,000 amas in this direction from here, from this straight line. So you measure it from that straight line. You measure the 2,000 amas in this direction from this end here. And in this direction, you don't measure it from here, you measure it from here. So you look at it like you square it off, straighten it out, and you look at it like this is filled in. Or similarly, oikmingam, or if the city was built in the form of a gamma, the Greek letter a gamma, which is an L shape, a chaf yavanis. So if the city was built in an L shape, something like this. So you have houses here, you have houses here. You don't measure in this direction from here. You look at it like it's filled in, and you measure it from here, from this edge over here. So similarly, you look at this like it's filled in, and you measure it from here. So now the Gemara will explain the different cases that we just mentioned. If it's long, then you don't square it off, you don't extend the city, you leave it as it is. In fact, the Gemara Pshita, well, of course, if it's straight, what's there to extend? The Gemara says, that it's long in one direction, but short in the other. Meaning it's not a square, it's a rectangle, but it's not a square. So if you have a city that it's straight, it's not in an L, it's not in a bow, but it's not square. So you might think that you do extend it, that we would first square it off. We would make it into a square and draw the line so that it's square. And then extend it out 2,000 amas. Kamashma, no, we don't. Since it's straight lines, you measure the 2,000 amas in each of the directions from the straight lines. So now the same, you might think that you extend it out and give the width equal to its length. Kamash Malan, that we don't. That's the chiddush over here. If it's square, the next case in the Braisa says if it's square, you don't make corners for it. In fact, the Gemara Pshita, well, it's already square. What's there to square off? Gemara answers, it is square, but it's not aligned in the directions of the east-west, north-south directions of the earth, of the oil. So you might think, you might think at first you have to align it with the directions of the oilam. So if you have a city that, let's say it's square, but it's not aligned that north, south, east, west, so it's something like this. So you might think that, well, first I have to straighten it off and align it with, and make a square that is a square with the ribuya shel oilam. That now has straight lines, northwest, east, northwest, east, and south, that is straight lines with the ribuya shel oilam. Kamashana, we don't. We say it's straight lines, even though it's not aligned north, south, east, west. You draw the 2,000 amas from whatever direction it is, even though it's not aligned with the north and the south and the east, west of the oil. Next case is if one house protruded like a tower, or two houses like two towers. It said if there's only one, even one house, that we straighten it off, we draw a straight line, we level it off. Then so why do you have to tell me two houses? Certainly if you have two areas that protrude, that you would draw a straight line. Manach, if you have one, certainly if you have two. For the Gemara, now what the Chiddush over here is, it's on two different sides of the city. The Chiddush is over here is that it extends on two different sides of the city. So you're straightening it out here, and if it also is on the other end of the city, there is also, it extends out. So you'd have to therefore draw the line. So if it extends on two sides of the city, there's a house that extends here. So you're drawing, extending it out here and here. So you might think we only extend out in one direction, not in two directions. Kamash Malan, that if it has even in two directions, we also extend it out. So you come in keshes, or you come in gam, so if it has, it's the shape of a bow, or like an L shape, then we look at the interior, the middle part of it, as though it's filled with houses. We look at the interior here like it's full. So therefore, and then after you draw the straight line from the ends, you imagine that the interior is filled up, then you measure the 2,000 amas. If you have a city that's in the shape of a bow, if between the two ends there's less than 4,000 amas, then you measure it from the imaginary bowstring. But if not, you measure it from the tchum, from the bow. So, if you have a city that's in the form of a bow, if there's less than 2,000 amas between the two ends of it, meaning there's less than 4,000 amas between them, so the tchumim overlap. The 2,000 amas from here, 2,000 would overlap. So there's less than 4,000 amas, so 2,000 amas from here would overlap with the 2,000 amas of here. Then we look at these two ends, these are houses and chatzeros, we would look at these as all merged, as all one city. You draw the imaginary line, and you measure the 2,000 amas out. But if there's more than 4,000 amas, the tchumim don't overlap. We look at these as separate from each other. So we don't look at it as all one city. We look at it as two separate cities. And therefore, you measure the tchum not from the ends. You measure the tchum from the bow, from here. Measure 2,000 amas from here. So that's the simple meaning of it. So therefore, Rashi says, when we say that we measure 2,000 amas from here, that's only if he's exiting from here. But if he exits from here, then he measures from here. Now, Tosfos adds on, Tosfos says that not that we say you measure from here, but that's only if there is 4,000 amas or more, not only from here, but also from here. But if you have a case where it is 4,000 amas or more at the ends, but over here they're within 4,000 amas, you don't have to measure from here. You measure from the point that it's within 4,000 amas. Because if the distance from here to here is less than 4,000 amas, we would view this as filled with houses. Even if this area is more than 4,000 amas, so we can't view this as filled with houses. But if the area over here is within 4,000 amas, you can measure from here, the Alpine amas, Chum Shabbos. When we say you measure from here, that's only if the two ends over here are also 4,000 amas away. Now, the Ritva points out that at the other end of the bow, where it has a circular end over here, over there, notwithstanding whatever is on the end over here if the two ends of the bow are 4,000 amas apart. But at this end of the bow, in any event, you would square it off over here. There's no reason you would square it off. Even if over here you can't, because they're more than 4,000 amas, more than 2,000 amas on each side. They're not overlapping tchumim. But at this end of the bow, you would square it off, and you would gain the corners over here. Frag the Gemara, Umi amar Rav Huna hachi, did Rav Huna say this? V'amar Rav Huna chay mesayir, shenifritza b'mei v'arboin v'achas u'shlish, if you have a wall of the city. And a wall of the city that has a pirza with a breach, it's broken, and the distance between the two ends is 141 and a third amas, meaning that at each side of the pirza, you have 70 and 2/3 amma. So if you have the wall of the city, so the wall is broken over here. So now you have a space between the two ends. And the house has also been destroyed here. So you have now, similar to what we just had with the caches, you have the two ends of the walls. So now, if you have the distance between this is 141 and 2/3, then you say they're all considered one. We don't view this as two separate cities. We continue to view it as one. You therefore join the two together, and you measure the Tchum Shabbos from here, and you measure the distances from here and here. But that's only if it's 141 and 2/3, meaning that you have a karpuf on each end. On each end, you have 17 and 2/3 amas. Then we say we join them together. And then it's considered as one city. But if it has more than that, then you can't join it. So you see that we don't say alpaim amma for each side. We say 70 and 2/3 for each side. Amar Rabba Barula loikasha. Kan beruach hachas, kan mishtei ruchais. There's a difference if it's meruach hachas or shtei ruchais. Meaning, what we said over here, our case is a case of a keshes, is a bow. So it's joined at the back. Now, when we say over here that the distance can't be more than 141 and 2/3, we're talking not where it was still joined together. It was broken straight through. So the wall over here was breached. The houses were demolished. And you have now, in effect, two cities. You have two cities, a space right between the two. So there's nothing joining the two together. In the case of the kashes, they're physically joined together with the houses. There we say the tchum, the distance, is alpaim am on each side. But here we're talking where it's completely demolished between them. You have effectively two cities. So if you have 141 and 2/3 overlap, now there's a karp of a city has a karp of, that means the outskirts of it, the outlying areas are considered part of the city. So if you have the overlapping outskirts, there's 70 and 2/3 on each side, they overlap, then we consider this to be one city, and therefore we join it together. If there's more than 70 and 2/3, more than 141 and a third on total, then we view it as two separate cities, and therefore they can't be joined. Practically more, well, if that's the case, that you're talking where it's breached straight through, it's mishtei ruchais, practically more, my kamashmalan, and the chiddush is a noisim karpel v'zu, that for each city you give outskirts, and therefore we consider, if they overlap, considered to be one. He already told us that. It's not because we learned noisim karpel v'lir. You give, before you measure the alpaim am of the tchum of the city, you first add on the karpov, the outskirts, the 70 and 2/3 amas, and from there you measure the 2,000 amas. That's what Rameir said. But no, when you have one city, you don't measure it from the karpov. This din of karpov was mentioned only in this regard. Ella ben shtei ayoras, between two cities, that when you say if the two cities have a karpaf and have overlapping areas, then you consider them as one. Ve'itmar, and Rav Huna explained, Rav Huna Amar, karpaf lazu, karpaf lazu. But B'chia Barav Amar, a nice melech karpaf echad l'shneim. B'chia Barav says you only give one karpaf, but Rav Huna said, no, you give for each one. So if you have two cities, they're close to each other. If they have overlapping 141 and a third amas, 72 thirds on each side, the outskirts overlap, we consider it to be one. So we know that Rav Huna says this din of nice and karpa fleir. Gemara answers stricha. It's necessary. Because if you only told me in the case where the city was breached, where it was demolished and destroyed, I would say over there that you give the karpa of Mishum Havlait Sad Het Mikar, because initially it was one city. So over here, I would say perhaps Dafka over here, Rav Huna says you give a karpa for each one. Aval Hasa Mei Maloi, but over there, they were never one city. So perhaps you wouldn't say that you give a karpa for each one. V'yashmin and Hasam, if it only told me in that case, I would say Mishum D'Tchikatash Mishayim. I would say because you have to give them a karpa for each one, because otherwise the usage is very difficult. They need the outskirts, the outlying areas. So as in reality, this area of the karpa is something that is necessary for the use of the city, and therefore when you measure the tchum, you view it as there's a karpa for each one, because in reality, it's needed for the use of each city. Because their use would be restricted if you did not give them a karpa. But over here, it was one city. It was all one city to begin with. And they didn't have a karpa over here. Now that it's broken, I would think, well, they never had an open area over here. Why should I say that all of a sudden, we should view it as they have this open area as part of the use of the city. It's part and parcel of the city and therefore considered one. And it's a big chiddush. So now, we were talking before about the bow, between the two ends of the bow. Well, what about the distance between the interior of the bow and to the line between them, the imaginary line between them? What distance, is there any limiting distance over there? So Rabbi Baruch Huna Omar Alpai Mama, he says that Alpai Mama, if you have more than 2,000 amas between those areas, then you cannot view this as filled with houses. If the area between here and here is more than 2,000 amas, you can't view it as being filled with houses. Because if you'd say that, you'd have to go beyond the tchum to get to that area. So you can't go from here to here. You'd be going past the tchum. So you can't view this as being one house. So, but however, Rabbi Baruch Huna, he says no. Even more than 2,000 amas, you can still view this as filled with houses in one city. So he says, even yes, from also the Rav Brei, the Rav Huna, Mistabre, he said, that's Mistabre, the boy Hara, also derech batim. Because in any event, you can still go around the edge and still come to this area. So even if you can't travel from here, you can still travel around here. So therefore, he says, even if this is more than 2,000 amas, as long as there's not more than 4,000 amas or more between the two ends, you can view this as filled with houses.